It was a cold winter afternoon in the heart of the city when billionaire Matthew Coleman's life took a sudden turn. While walking down the street, wrapped in the luxuries that his wealth afforded him, he saw something that made him stop dead in his tracks, a frail beggar woman, her face obscured by dirt and wear, but those eyes, they were unmistakable. The woman was Emma, his childhood love, the girl he had once promised the world to, but life had torn them apart. In that moment, their past collided with the harshness of the present, and what he did next left everyone speechless. Title: A millionaire recognizes beggar on the street. She was his childhood love. What he did next surprised everyone. Matthew Coleman was born into wealth, a child of privilege who never had to worry about the basics in life. Growing up, his world was perfect, except for one thing: it was lonely. Despite his parents' affluence, their lives were too preoccupied with business and social standing, leaving Matthew to fend for himself emotionally. This changed when he met Emma, a girl from the other side of town, whose warmth and joy seemed to melt away his loneliness. Emma lived a simple life with her father, a mechanic, and her mother, a teacher. Though their worlds were vastly different, the two children shared a connection that went beyond class. They would meet secretly by the riverside, away from the judgmental eyes of society, where they would dream of a future together. Matthew promised her that he would one day take her far away from her struggles, give her the life she deserved, and that nothing could tear them apart. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Matthew's father was grooming him to take over the family business, and Emma, despite her love for Matthew, felt the weight of their differing worlds press down on her. One day, she left town without a word, leaving Matthew heartbroken. He searched for her, but she had vanished like a whisper in the wind. Years passed, and Matthew buried himself in work, becoming one of the wealthiest men in the country. Yet, in the quiet moments, he still thought of Emma, wondering what had become of her. Years passed, and Matthew had become a towering figure in the world of finance, the CEO of Coleman Enterprises. He had everything: money, power, and influence. But something was always missing, a void that all the luxury in the world couldn't fill. It was on an ordinary day, while walking through the crowded streets of the city, that fate intervened. The city was alive with the hustle of Christmas shoppers, the air thick with the smell of roasting chestnuts and the sound of carolers singing. Matthew was on his way to a business meeting, his mind occupied with deals and numbers, when something, or rather, someone, caught his eye. A disheveled woman, sitting on the curb, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Help me, I'm hungry." She was thin, gaunt even, her clothes tattered and dirty. But it was her eyes that stopped him in his tracks. Matthew felt a jolt of recognition that sent shivers down his spine. He knew those eyes. They were Emma's, his Emma, the girl he had loved with every fiber of his being. She looked so different now, life having worn her down in ways he couldn't imagine. His heart raced as a flood of memories surged through him, each one more vivid than the last. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. How had she ended up here, like this? He approached her, his mind a swirl of confusion and disbelief. As he knelt down beside her, he said softly, "Emma?" At first, she didn't respond. Her eyes flickered up to meet his, and for a moment, it seemed as though she didn't recognize him. But then, something clicked. Her eyes widened in shock, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Matthew?" The moment was electric. Neither of them moved for what felt like an eternity, their eyes locked in a silent exchange that spoke volumes. Matthew's mind raced. How had she come to this? Where had she been all these years? He had so many questions, but the only words that came out were, "What happened to you?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper as she told him of the years since she left. Her father had fallen ill, and with no money for proper care, they had lost everything. She had tried to survive on her own, taking odd jobs, but the world had not been kind to her. She had no family left, no friends, no one to turn to. Life had been a series of cruel twists and turns, leading her to the streets, begging for scraps just to survive. As she spoke, Matthew felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had promised to protect her, to be there for her, but he had failed. He had been too caught up in his own world, his own success, while she had been suffering. The weight of his neglect pressed down on him like a boulder. But this was not the time for self-pity. He had found her again, and he wasn't going to let her slip away this time. Without a second thought, Matthew stood up and extended his hand to her. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm yet filled with compassion. Emma hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I don't want your pity, Matthew," she said, her voice weak but resolute. "This isn't pity," Matthew replied, kneeling beside her once more. "This is me keeping my promise. I told you I'd take care of you, and I failed. But I won't fail again. Please, let me help you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, but she didn't move. The years of hardship had left her wary of trusting anyone, even the man she had once loved. But something in Matthew's voice, the sincerity in his eyes, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, this was her second chance. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Matthew took her to his car, instructing his driver to take them to his home, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. The ride was silent, the tension thick in the air. Emma stared out of the window, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone after everything she had been through? When they arrived at the mansion, Emma was overwhelmed. She had known Matthew came from wealth, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. The house was like something out of a fairy tale, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with priceless art. But it wasn't the wealth that mattered to Emma. She had learned the hard way that money could not buy happiness. What she cared about was whether Matthew had changed. Was he still the kind, loving boy she had fallen in love with, or had he been consumed by the cold, ruthless world of business? Matthew led her to a room where she could freshen up, and as she stood there in front of the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her face was worn and tired, her clothes ragged. She had been living on the streets for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be clean, to feel safe. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Matthew, holding a tray of food. "I thought you might be hungry," he said softly, placing the tray on the table. Emma looked at the food, her stomach growling, but she couldn't bring herself to eat. Instead, she looked at Matthew, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I owe you," Matthew replied, sitting down beside her. "I should have been there for you, but I wasn't. Let me make it right." Over the next few weeks, Matthew helped Emma rebuild her life. He paid for her to get the medical care she needed, bought her new clothes, and helped her find a job at one of his companies. But more importantly, he was there for her, just as he had promised all those years ago. As Emma slowly regained her strength, their bond grew stronger. It wasn't long before the feelings they had buried deep inside began to resurface. But this time, it was different. They were no longer the naive children who had once dreamed of running away together. They were two people who had been through the worst life had to offer and had come out the other side stronger. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Matthew turned to Emma and said, "I never stopped loving you, you know." Emma smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never stopped loving you either." And in that moment, they both knew that their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The end.